My name is Angelo. I'm 26 years old and I never thought I'd be the one to refuse helping my own father. But after he threw away my entire future to support his friend's entitled son, my sympathy ran dry. Now that son sits behind bars and my dad calls me daily begging for help I'll never give. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal, especially when they come from the person who promised to always put you first. Before I dive into this painful story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to make the difficult choice between loyalty to family and loyalty to yourself. Growing up in a modest suburban neighborhood in Pennsylvania, I had what most would consider a pretty normal childhood. Our house wasn't fancy, but it was comfortable. A 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a small backyard where Dad would toss football with me on weekends. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. Dad made sure I never felt like I was missing out on anything important. My father, Martin, was a respected structural engineer at one of the biggest construction companies in the state. He had a reputation for being meticulous, reliable, and incredibly hardworking. People in the industry knew him as the guy who could solve problems nobody else could figure out. I admired him for that, his intelligence and dedication. He worked long hours sometimes, but he always made time for me. Mom was a high school English teacher passionate about literature and inspiring her students. She was the emotional backbone of our family, warm, nurturing, and incredibly patient. The kind of mom who would stay up all night helping with school projects or baking cookies for the entire class. Our home was filled with books because of her, and my love for reading came directly from her influence. Our family dynamic changed dramatically when I was 14. Mom was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. The following 8 months were a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and watching her slowly fade away. Despite fighting courageously, she passed away just before my 15th birthday. Her death left a massive void in our lives that nothing could fill. After Mom died, it was just Dad and me against the world. The first few months were incredibly difficult. Dad threw himself into work during the day, but at night I would sometimes hear him crying in their bedroom. I was dealing with my own grief too, but somehow our shared loss brought us closer together. We developed routines to keep ourselves functioning. I took over cooking dinner, mostly simple pasta dishes and sandwiches at first, while Dad handled the laundry and other household chores. I promise you, Angelo, Dad told me one night about 6 months after Mom's passing, you will always be my priority. Everything I do from now on is to make sure you have the best future possible. That's what your mother would have wanted. I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? He was my father, my hero, the man who had never let me down. School became my refuge after Mom died. I threw myself into studying, partly to distract from the grief, and partly because I had discovered my passion for medicine. I wanted to become a doctor, specifically an oncologist. I wanted to help people like my mom, maybe even find better treatments so other kids wouldn't lose their parents too young. Dad fully supported this dream, proudly telling anyone who would listen about my ambitions. Throughout high school, I maintained a near-perfect GPA. I joined the science club, volunteered at the local hospital, and even shadowed physicians during summer breaks. By senior year, my hard work paid off when acceptance letters started arriving from several prestigious universities, including my dream school with one of the best pre-med programs in the country. The financial aspect seemed secure too. Mom's life insurance policy had been substantial, and Dad had set aside that money specifically for my education. Additionally, he had his own savings that he planned to contribute. We weren't concerned about student loans, at least for undergraduate studies. Medical school would be another challenge, but we had time to figure that out. Your education fund is sacred, Dad had assured me. That money is untouchable. It's your future. Around this time, Dad started mentioning his college friend Marcus more frequently. They had been roommates and best friends during their university years, but had somewhat drifted apart as adults, keeping in touch mainly through occasional phone calls and Christmas cards. Marcus had gone into investment banking and had done extremely well financially. He lived in a mansion in Connecticut, drove luxury cars, and sent his son to elite private schools. Marcus has always been brilliant with money, Dad would say, a hint of admiration in his voice. But between you and me, I think he missed out on the important stuff. He barely knows his own son. That son was Jason. I had met him a few times over the years at rare family gatherings. He was a year younger than me, but we had never connected. He seemed disinterested in anything I had to say, always glued to his phone or making sarcastic comments under his breath. I didn't dislike him. We simply had nothing in common. He was into expensive clothes parties and status symbols, while I preferred books, science, and quieter activities. Little did I know that Jason would soon become a permanent fixture in our lives, and that his presence would shatter everything my father and I had built together. The summer after my high school graduation should have been filled with excitement about college and my future. Instead, everything changed when Dad announced we would have a houseguest for the foreseeable future. Marcus and his wife are getting divorced. Dad explained one evening over dinner. It's getting ugly, and Marcus needs to handle some business overseas for the next couple of years. He asked if Jason could stay with us until things settle down. I was surprised but tried to be understanding. How long exactly is he staying? I asked already, calculating how this might affect our household. About 2 years, Dad replied, avoiding eye contact. Marcus has to establish a new office in Singapore. It's a huge opportunity for him. 2 years seemed excessive, but I nodded anyway. Dad had always taught me about helping others in need, and I figured this was just another example of his generosity. Besides, I would be away at college most of that time, so it wouldn't impact me directly. Or so I thought. Jason arrived 3 days later with 6 suitcases and an attitude that immediately set me on edge. Dad welcomed him with open arms, having prepared our guest room with new bedding, a desk, and even a television that he had purchased specifically for Jason's arrival. "Uncle Martin, thanks for letting me crash here," Jason said, flashing a charming smile that disappeared the moment Dad turned away. He gave me a dismissive glance before asking, "So where exactly am I staying in this?" "It's place." The subtle dig at our home stung, but I brushed it off. Our house wasn't a mansion like what he was used to, but it was clean, comfortable, and filled with memories. The first few weeks with Jason were a period of adjustment. On the surface, he was polite whenever Dad was around. He would help with dishes after dinner, or offer to mow the lawn. But when we were alone, a different side emerged. He made snide comments about our neighborhood, our furniture, even the food Dad prepared. Nothing was up to his standards. "Do you guys always eat frozen pizza on Fridays?" he asked one evening, barely concealing his disdain. At home, we usually had our chef prepare something fresh. I later learned from Dad that Jason had been expelled from his previous school for fighting. Not just any fight. He had apparently sent another student to the hospital with a broken nose after the boy had made a comment about Jason's expensive shoes. Instead of showing remorse, Jason had simply demanded that his father move him to a different school. "He's just going through a rough time," Dad defended him when I expressed concern. "His parents' divorce has been hard on him, and now his father's shipping him off to stay with people he barely knows. We need to give him grace, Angelo." I tried to see it from Dad's perspective, but something about Jason felt off. His charm seemed calculated, his generosity performative. It was like watching an actor play the role of a grateful houseguest whenever Dad was watching. As days turned into weeks, I noticed subtle changes in our household dynamics. Dad began asking my opinion less, and consulting with Jason more. What movie should we watch? Jason's pick. Where should we go for dinner? Somewhere Jason wanted to try. What weekend activities should we plan? Whatever would make Jason feel welcome. I told myself not to be petty. After all, Jason was the guest and he was going through a difficult time. But the knot in my stomach grew tighter when Dad started altering our long-standing traditions to accommodate Jason's preferences. Our Sunday morning hikes, a ritual we'd maintained even after Mom died, were replaced by sleeping in because Jason had a late night. My birthday dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant was changed to an upscale steakhouse because Jason doesn't really like pasta. Small changes perhaps, but they felt symbolic of a larger shift. The most alarming change came when Dad started spending money differently. Despite being financially comfortable, my father had always been frugal, a trait that had served our family well. Suddenly, he was buying expensive items for Jason, designer clothes, the latest smartphone, even a laptop that cost twice what he'd spent on mine. Marcus sent money for Jason's expenses, Dad explained when I cautiously brought it up. But the explanation didn't align with the growing collection of credit card statements I occasionally glimpsed on Dad's desk. The situation escalated when Dad came home one evening with a brand new car, Not for himself, but for Jason. He needs transportation to his new school, Dad explained, tossing the keys to a beaming Jason. Besides, Marcus is covering most of the cost. I nodded silently. Though I knew our second car, which I had been using, was perfectly functional and could have served Jason just as well. The extravagance seemed unnecessary, especially with my college expenses looming. That night, I overheard a phone conversation between Dad and Marcus that confirmed my suspicions. Dad was explaining the car purchase, and Marcus seemed surprised. "It's no problem," Dad insisted. "Jason needed it, and I'm happy to help. You can pay me back whenever." After hanging up, Dad noticed me standing in the hallway and had the decency to look embarrassed. "Marcus is a bit overwhelmed right now," he explained weakly, "but he's good for it." I wanted to believe that this was temporary, that once I left for college things would normalize, that Dad was just being extraordinarily generous to his friend's son during a difficult transition, that once I was gone he would stop trying to compensate for my absence by showering Jason with attention and gifts. I was wrong on all counts. August arrived, and with it came the time to finalize my college enrollment. I had chosen Westmoreland University, one of the top schools for pre-med in the country. Their program had an exceptional acceptance rate into medical schools, and several renowned oncologists had graduated from there. It wasn't just a college choice. It was the first step toward fulfilling the promise I'd made at my mother's grave. The acceptance package had arrived months earlier, and I'd completed all the necessary paperwork. All that remained was making the first tuition payment and finalizing my housing arrangement. Dad and I had agreed to handle this together as we'd planned for years. "Let's set up the bank transfer this weekend," I reminded Dad one Thursday evening as we cleared the dinner table. Jason was out with friends from his new private school, so it was just the two of us. "Right, yes," Dad replied, but something in his tone made me pause. He wasn't meeting my eyes, and his hands fidgeted with the dishcloth. "Actually, Angelo, we might need to talk about that." My stomach dropped. I knew that tone. It was the same one he'd used when telling me Mom's cancer had spread. "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately sitting back down. Dad sighed heavily, finally looking up. "There's been a slight complication with your college fund. Just temporary, of course, but we might need to adjust our plans." "What kind of complication?" I asked, my voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. "I had to use some of the money," he admitted. "Jason got into some trouble. Gambling debts. Serious ones. Men came to the house looking for him, Angelo. Dangerous men." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "You used my college fund to pay off Jason's gambling debts. How much?" "Almost all of it," Dad whispered, looking miserable. "I had no choice. These weren't ordinary bookies. They were threatening him, threatening us. And Marcus. His millionaire father couldn't help," I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. "Marcus has cash flow issues right now with the divorce and the new office. He'll reimburse us, of course, but it will take time." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what this meant. The carefully planned future I had worked toward for years was suddenly in jeopardy. "So what happens now?" I finally asked. "You might need to defer for a year," Dad suggested tentatively. "Just until we can rebuild the fund. Or maybe consider community college for the first 2 years." Community college. After graduating with a 4.0 GPA and perfect SAT scores, after receiving merit scholarships that would cover a portion, but not nearly enough of the prestigious university's tuition. "Did you even consider what this would do to my future before you handed over my education money?" I asked, my voice breaking despite my efforts to remain calm. "Of course I did," Dad insisted. "But what choice did I have? These were dangerous people, Angelo. They threatened violence. Was I supposed to let Jason get hurt?" "You were supposed to protect me too," I replied quietly. "You promised, Mom. You promised me." Dad flinched as if I'd slapped him. "This is temporary. I'll fix it, I swear. I'll work overtime, take on consulting jobs. Marcus will pay us back." But I knew better. The fall semester was starting in 3 weeks. Even if Dad started earning extra money immediately, it wouldn't be enough in time. The following days were a blur of desperate alternatives. I called the financial aid office explaining my situation and begging for additional assistance. They were sympathetic but limited in what they could offer this late in the process. I applied for emergency loans, additional scholarships, anything that might help bridge the gap. In the end, the math was simple and brutal. I didn't have enough money to attend Westmoreland that fall. My only options were deferring enrollment or drastically downgrading my educational plans. With a heavy heart, I deferred my admission for 1 year. The university was understanding, assuring me that my scholarships would still be available the following fall. It was small comfort, as I watched my classmates pack up and leave for their college adventures, while I remained behind. I found a job at the local department store, working as many hours as they would give me. The pay was minimum wage, but it was something. Every dollar went into a new bank account that only I could access. Throughout this time, Jason showed no gratitude for the sacrifice that had been made on his behalf. If anything, he seemed to take it as his due. He continued his extravagant lifestyle, now driving the car my father had bought him to parties and shopping trips. Whenever I worked evening shifts, I would return home to find him lounging in our living room, expensive sneakers propped on our coffee table, playing video games on a new console that hadn't been there before. "Your dad's pretty cool," he commented once, not looking away from his game. "Mine would have let those guys break my legs." The casual way he referenced the situation that had derailed my life made my blood boil, but I held my tongue. Confronting him would accomplish nothing except creating more tension in a home that was already feeling less like mine every day. Dad, for his part, seemed caught between guilt about my situation and an inexplicable need to continue catering to Jason's every whim. He worked longer hours and took on weekend projects, presumably to rebuild my college fund. Yet somehow there was always money for whatever Jason needed or wanted. "It's complicated," Dad would say whenever I questioned a new purchase for Jason. "Marcus is sending what he can, but Jason needs to maintain certain appearances at his new school." Appearances. As if those mattered more than the education I had worked so hard to earn. As if designer clothes for Jason were more important than my future career as a doctor. As fall turned to winter, I watched from the sidelines as my peers posted about their college experiences on social media. Lab experiments, study groups, new friendships, and academic challenges, everything I should have been experiencing. Instead, I was folding sweaters at the department store and coming home to a house where I increasingly felt like a guest. The sacrifice might have been bearable if Jason had shown any sign of turning his life around. But from what I could observe, he was simply continuing his pattern of entitlement and poor choices. He was skipping classes at his expensive private school, coming home smelling like alcohol on weeknights, and somehow acquiring possessions that seemed beyond even my father's generous provisions. I tried to warn Dad, but he dismissed my concerns as jealousy. "You need to be more understanding," he admonished after I pointed out Jason's declining grades. "Not everyone is naturally academically inclined like you. He's finding his way. Finding his way at my expense, with my future as collateral damage." The bitterness I tried to suppress grew stronger with each passing day. The father I had known, the one who had promised to put me first, seemed to have been replaced by a man I barely recognized, one whose priorities had shifted dramatically, with me no longer at the top of the list. Winter gave way to spring, and I continued my monotonous routine of work and saving. Each paycheck brought me slightly closer to my goal, though the progress felt painfully slow. At the current rate, I would still be significantly short by the time fall enrollment came around again. Nevertheless, I persisted, clinging to the hope that Dad would eventually fulfill his promise to restore my college fund. One rainy April afternoon, I came home early from work after my shift was unexpectedly cut short. The house was quiet, with neither Dad nor Jason around. I decided to use the rare moment of peace to organize my financial documents and update my savings spreadsheet. While searching for a calculator in Dad's home office, I accidentally knocked over a stack of papers. As I gathered them up, an official-looking document caught my eye, a home equity loan agreement. With growing horror, I realized Dad had taken out a substantial loan against our house, a home my parents had worked so hard to pay off, the one tangible asset our family owned outright. The date on the document showed it had been processed just 2 months after Jason moved in. The amount was staggering, nearly half the value of our home. What could possibly have justified such a drastic financial decision? My hands trembling, I began searching through the other papers, my earlier respect for Dad's privacy forgotten in the face of this discovery. Bank statements revealed regular large withdrawals. Tax documents showed penalties for early withdrawal from retirement accounts. Credit card statements displayed balances approaching their limits. The picture that emerged was devastating. Dad was not just financially strained, he was on the brink of complete financial ruin. And for what? I found my answer in a folder labeled Jason, School. Inside were tuition receipts for Westridge Academy, one of the most expensive private schools in the state. The quarterly payments were astronomical, far exceeding what Marcus was supposedly contributing. Another document showed a lease agreement for an apartment near the school, a convenient place for Jason to study with friends according to the note in Dad's handwriting. So while I had been forced to defer my college dreams due to temporary financial constraints, Dad had been paying for Jason's elite private education and providing him with a separate apartment. The betrayal cut deep, made worse by the realization that Dad had been actively hiding these expenditures from me. But the most shocking discovery came when I found several absent notices from Westridge Academy. According to these records, Jason had stopped attending classes regularly months ago. In fact, he had accumulated so many absences that he was on the verge of academic dismissal. If Jason wasn't attending the school, Dad was paying a fortune, for where was he spending his time, and what was happening to all that money? I decided to find out. The next day, instead of going to work, I called in sick and followed Jason after he left the house, supposedly heading to school. He drove his new car not toward Westridge Academy, but to an upscale apartment complex across town. Using the key fob, he entered the building confidently, clearly a regular visitor. I waited in my car for hours watching the entrance. Jason emerged in the late afternoon with two older guys I didn't recognize. They all got into a luxury SUV and drove to a part of town known for its nightlife, despite it being only 4 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Over the next week, I continued my surveillance, when possible piecing together Jason's actual routine. He rarely, if ever, went to school. Instead, he spent his days at that apartment, at shopping malls, or meeting with various people who looked considerably older and rougher than typical high school students. One evening, I managed to get close enough to overhear a conversation between Jason and one of his companions. They were discussing prices and quantities using thinly veiled terminology that made it clear they were talking about drugs. Jason wasn't just a user. He appeared to be involved in distribution. Armed with this information, I confronted Dad. It was a Sunday evening, and Jason was out giving us privacy for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. "Dad, we need to talk about Jason." I began sitting him down at the kitchen table. "What about him?" Dad asked, immediately defensive. "He's not going to school." I followed him. "He's involved with drugs, Dad. Selling them, not just using." Dad's face hardened. "You followed him. What gives you the right to spy on him?" His response caught me off guard. I had expected shock, concern, maybe even gratitude for bringing this to his attention, not anger directed at me. "I found the loan documents, Dad," I pressed on, "and the tuition payments. You're bankrupting yourself for someone who's taking complete advantage of you." "You went through my private papers." Now Dad was truly angry, his face flushing. "Those are none of your business." "They became my business when you used my college fund to bail Jason out," I shot back. "You're paying for a school he doesn't attend, and an apartment he uses for God knows what, while I'm folding clothes at the mall because I can't go to college." Dad stood up, pacing the kitchen. "You don't understand the whole situation. Marcus is under tremendous pressure with the divorce and his business. Jason needs stability structure. He's not getting either of those things from you," I argued. "You're just giving him money and freedom with no accountability. He's using you, Dad." "That's enough." Dad slammed his hand on the counter. "This conversation is over. Jason is going through a difficult time, and you're just jealous because you've had to delay college for a year. Plenty of people take gap years, Angelo. It's not the end of the world." His dismissal of my concerns felt like a physical blow. "This isn't about jealousy," I said quietly. "This is about you breaking your promise to Mom, to me. You said I would always be your priority." Dad's expression changed, a flash of guilt, crossing his features before hardening again. "Jason is also my son now," he declared. Marcus entrusted him to me, and he needs me more than you do right now. You're strong, capable. You'll figure things out." In that moment, something broke between us. The father who had once been my hero, my rock, had just explicitly stated that I was no longer his priority, that the entitled, manipulative son of his college friend mattered more than his own flesh and blood. "I see," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Then I won't burden you with my presence any longer." I went to my room and packed a bag with essential clothes and personal items. Dad followed me, his anger now replaced with alarm. "What are you doing? Don't be dramatic, Angelo." "I'm not being dramatic," I replied calmly. "I'm adapting to the new reality. You've made your choice clear, and I'm making mine." I called Ryan, my best friend since elementary school, who immediately offered his couch until I could figure out something more permanent. As I headed for the door with my bag, Dad tried to block my path. "You can't just leave," he insisted. "Where will you go? How will you manage?" "I'll figure things out," I echoed his earlier words. "After all, I'm strong and capable, right?" And with that, I walked out of the house that no longer felt like home, leaving behind not just my physical possessions but also the last remnants of the relationship I had once treasured with my father. The transition to independence was brutal but necessary. Ryan's parents welcomed me into their home with a warmth that highlighted just how cold my own had become. They offered me their spare room for as long as I needed it, refusing to accept rent despite my insistence. "Focus on saving for school," Ryan's mom said firmly. "That's more important right now." I took her advice to heart, picking up a second job as a night security guard at a local warehouse. Between both jobs, I was working nearly 70 hours a week. It was exhausting, but the physical and mental fatigue helped dull the emotional pain of my father's betrayal. Dad called repeatedly during the first few weeks after I left, leaving voicemails that ranged from angry demands to return home to tearful pleas for understanding. I listened to each one but responded to none. What was there to say? He had made his choice, and I had made mine. Jason predictably never reached out at all. With 2 incomes and minimal expenses living with Ryan's family, my savings began to grow more rapidly. I also applied for every scholarship and grant I could find, writing countless essays about overcoming adversity and financial hardship. By midsummer, I had secured several small scholarships that, combined with my savings, put Westmoreland back within reach. Life settled into a new rhythm. Wake up, go to the department store, catch a few hours of sleep, work the night shift at the warehouse, repeat. Weekends were for scholarship applications and catching up on sleep. It wasn't ideal, but it was purposeful. Every day brought me closer to reclaiming my future. 8 months after leaving home, I received an unexpected visit from Mrs. Jenkins, our elderly neighbor who had lived next door to us for as long as I could remember. She had tracked me down through mutual acquaintances concerned about my welfare. "I've been worried about you, Angelo," she said as we sat in a coffee shop. "But I can see you're doing all right for yourself." "I'm managing," I replied. "How are things in the old neighborhood?" Her expression grew troubled. "That's partly why I wanted to find you. Your father's house is being foreclosed on. The bank put up the notice last week." The news shouldn't have surprised me given what I'd discovered about Dad's finances, but it still landed like a punch to the gut. That house contained all my childhood memories, including the last physical connections to my mother. "Do you know what happened?" I asked, though I had my suspicions. "Your father lost his job about 4 months ago," Mrs. Jenkins explained. "Something about company funds being misappropriated. There were rumors." She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "What rumors?" I pressed. "That he had been using company resources to help that boy who was staying with you, paying for things the company wouldn't approve of. I don't know the details, but it was serious enough that they let him go after 20 years. So Dad's financial recklessness had extended beyond our personal resources to his workplace. The level of self-destruction was staggering." "And Jason?" I asked. "Is he still there?" Mrs. Jenkins shook her head. "That boy got arrested about a month ago. Drug charges, assault, something serious. It's been in all the local papers." She pulled out a folded newspaper clipping from her purse and handed it to me. The headline read, "Local teen among 5 arrested in drug ring bust." Jason's smug mugshot stared back at me from the page. According to the article, he was facing multiple felony charges, including distribution of controlled substances and aggravated assault after allegedly beating a customer who couldn't pay. Your father's been selling everything to pay for lawyers, Mrs. Jenkins continued. The car furniture, even your mother's jewelry, I heard. He's a shell of himself, Angelo. I folded the clipping and returned it to her, my emotions, a complex mixture of vindication and sorrow. I had been right about Jason all along, but being right brought no satisfaction. After that meeting, curiosity got the better of me. I drove past our old house and was shocked by its appearance. The once immaculate lawn was overgrown, the paint peeling, and a large foreclosure notice was indeed taped to the front door. It looked abandoned, though Mrs. Jenkins had confirmed Dad was still living there. Against my better judgment, I decided to visit Jason in the county jail. I needed to understand why he had taken advantage of my father's generosity, why he had shown no remorse for destroying our lives. The visiting room was stark and depressing. Jason appeared in an orange jumpsuit, thinner than I remembered, and sporting a new scar across his cheek. Yet his trademark smirk remained intact as he sat across from me. "Well, look who it is," he drawled. "Uncle Martin's real son gracing me with his presence. To what do I owe the honor?" "I want to know why," I said simply. "Why did you do it? My dad gave you everything." Jason laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Because I could. Because your dad made it so easy. He was so desperate to play the hero, to be the good father figure that my own dad never was. He bankrupted himself for you." I said, my voice tight with anger. "He lost his job, his home, everything." "Not my problem," Jason shrugged. "Nobody forced him to keep writing checks. Besides, your dad's an idiot. He caught me high as a kite multiple times and still believed me when I said I was just tired from studying. He found drug paraphernalia in my room and accepted my story that I was holding it for a friend. He wanted to believe the best about me so badly that he ignored what was right in front of his face. The casual cruelty in his assessment of my father was breathtaking. Yet I couldn't entirely disagree with his characterization. Dad had been willfully blind. "What about your father?" I asked. "Does Marcus know what's happened?" Another laugh. "Oh, that's the best part. Dear old Dad isn't coming back from Singapore, ever. He's got a new wife there, 20 years younger, and a baby on the way. The temporary assignment was his exit strategy from day one. He dumped me on your dad and disappeared." The revelation stunned me. "Dad doesn't know." "Probably not," Jason admitted. "Marcus stopped taking his calls months ago. But hey, I got a good run out of it. Almost 2 years of premium living on Uncle Martin's dime." I stood up, disgusted by his lack of remorse. "You'll be spending the next several years in a much less premium environment." Maybe Jason smirked. "But my lawyer thinks he can get me a deal. First-time offender, wealthy background, potential for rehabilitation. I might walk with just probation." "Good luck with that," I replied, turning to leave. "Especially now that your lawyer won't be getting paid anymore." That wiped the smirk off his face. "What are you talking about?" "Dad's broke. The house is in foreclosure. There's nothing left to sell. Your gravy train has finally run dry." I left him there, shouting questions that I had no intention of answering. The visit had confirmed what I already knew. Jason had never been worth the sacrifice my father had made. 2 days later, I attended Jason's court hearing, not out of support but out of a need for closure. I sat in the back of the courtroom watching as he was led in handcuffed and looking considerably less confident than during our jail visit. Dad was there too, sitting alone in the front row. From behind, I could see how much he had aged in the month since I'd left. His shoulders were hunched, his hair noticeably grayer. He looked broken. The proceedings were brief. Despite Jason's lawyer's efforts to paint him as a misguided youth, led astray by bad influences, the judge was unmoved. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including text messages detailing drug sales and witness testimonies about the assault. Jason was denied bail and remanded to custody pending trial. As people filed out of the courtroom, Dad remained seated, staring blankly ahead. I debated leaving without speaking to him, but ultimately decided against it. Whatever had happened between us, I wasn't cruel enough to ignore him in his moment of complete desolation. I approached slowly, sliding into the bench beside him. He looked up, his eyes widening in recognition. "Angelo," he whispered my name, catching in his throat. "You came." "Not for Jason," I clarified. "I needed to see this through." Dad nodded, understanding. "I've lost everything," he admitted, his voice hollow. "The house, my job, my savings. All for someone who never cared about me at all." "I tried to warn you," I said, not unkindly. "I know." Tears filled his eyes. "I was blind. Stupid. Marcus was my best friend in college. When he asked for help with Jason, it felt like a chance to repay him for all the times he helped me back then. But it was all a lie. He's not coming back. He's abandoned his son just like he abandoned our friendship." The admission came too late to heal the damage that had been done, but I appreciated the honesty nonetheless. "What will you do now?" I asked. "I don't know," Dad confessed. "I've been sleeping in my car the past few nights. The bank changed the locks on the house." Despite everything, the image of my father homeless caused a pang in my chest. But I had worked too hard rebuilding my own life to risk being dragged back into his chaos. "I'm sorry," I said, standing up. "I hope things get better for you." As I turned to leave, Dad reached for my hand. "Angelo, please. I need your help. I have nowhere to go." His plea hung in the air between us, a desperate call from a drowning man to the son he had once pushed away. "I need money for a place to stay." Dad continued, his grip on my hand tightening. "Just until I can get back on my feet. I know you must have some savings by now. Please, son." The irony was almost too much to bear. Here was my father, who had given away my college fund without hesitation, now asking me for the money I had painstakingly saved to replace what he had taken. "How much do you need?" I asked, more out of curiosity than willingness to help. "Just a few thousand to get started," he replied, hope flickering in his eyes. "Enough for first and last month's rent on an apartment. And—" he hesitated. "I also need to keep paying Jason's lawyer. He's facing serious charges, Angelo. He could get 10 years. And there it was. Even now, even after everything, Jason remained his priority. The realization crystallized something inside me. "No," I said, firmly pulling my hand away. "I won't give you money for Jason's lawyer. Not a single dollar." "But he's just a kid who made mistakes," Dad protested. "He needs help." "I needed help too," I reminded him. "I needed my college fund that you gave away. I needed the father who promised to put me first." Dad's face crumpled. "I know I failed you, and I'm sorry. But two wrongs don't make a right. Are you really going to let me be homeless? Let Jason go to prison for years when he could get rehabilitation instead." For a moment I wavered. This was my father, after all. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had held me when Mom died, who had been my hero for so many years. But then I remembered the months of working 2 jobs until my body ached. The nights spent wondering if I would ever reclaim my dream of becoming a doctor. The pain of realizing I had been replaced in my father's heart by someone who saw him only as a resource to exploit. "Jason isn't going to prison because of me," I said carefully. "He's going because of his own choices and yours. You chose to enable him instead of setting boundaries. You chose to give him money for drugs instead of consequences for his actions. You chose him over me, over and over again." "That's not fair," Dad protested weakly. "Isn't it you took the money Mom wanted me to have for education and gave it to a virtual stranger? You mortgaged our family home to pay for his private school that he didn't even attend. You risked your job, your reputation, everything we had built together. Those were your choices, Dad. And now you're facing the consequences." Dad's shoulders slumped in defeat. "So you're just going to walk away, leave me with nothing?" "The way you left me with nothing," I countered. "Yes, I have to. Not out of revenge, but because I've worked too hard to rebuild my life. In 2 months, I'm finally starting college. The money I've saved is for my future, not for bailing you out of a situation entirely of your own making." I stood up, ready to leave, but turned back for one final thought. "You know what the saddest part is? If you had come to me and said you needed help for yourself, just yourself, I might have considered it. But you're still putting Jason first even now, and I can't compete with that anymore. I won't." With those words, I walked out of the courtroom, leaving my father behind. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but also the most necessary. Sometimes love means setting boundaries even when it breaks your heart to do so. In the following weeks, I focused entirely on my upcoming transition to college. I gave notice at both jobs, thanked Ryan's family for their generosity, and began preparing for the move to Westmoreland University. My hard work with scholarship applications had paid off, securing enough financial aid to cover most of my expenses. The rest would come from my savings and a modest student loan. I also connected with a financial advisor who specialized in helping students navigate the complexities of educational funding. She was impressed by how much I had managed to save in such a short time. "Most people in your situation would have given up," she remarked during our consultation. "The fact that you persevered shows remarkable determination." It was during one of these financial planning sessions that I met Dr. Rebecca Harris, a professor from the medical school who served on the scholarship committee that had awarded me one of my grants. She had been intrigued by my personal statement and asked to meet me. "Your essay about wanting to become an oncologist because of your mother's experience was deeply moving," she told me over coffee. "But I was equally impressed by how you handled the financial setback. That kind of resilience is essential in medicine." Dr. Harris became an unexpected mentor, offering guidance not just about medical school preparations, but also about life's difficult choices. When I confided in her about the situation with my father, she listened without judgment. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone is to let them face the natural consequences of their actions, she observed. "It's how people grow. Your father made choices that hurt you deeply, and now he needs to find his own path forward just as you've found yours." Her words gave me permission to continue prioritizing my future without guilt. And when she told me about a special program designed to support students from challenging backgrounds who aspired to careers in medicine, I felt like pieces were finally falling into place. The Resilience in Medicine program provides not just financial support but also mentorship and research opportunities, she explained. "I think you would be an excellent candidate." With Dr. Harris's recommendation, I was accepted into the program, which would provide additional funding and support throughout my undergraduate years and potentially into medical school as well. For the first time since discovering my emptied college fund, I felt truly secure in my educational path. As moving day approached, I made one final decision that symbolized my commitment to my new beginning. I legally changed my last name from my father's to my mother's maiden name. It wasn't about rejection or spite. It was about honoring the parent who had genuinely put me first and claiming an identity independent of the pain my father had caused. The day before I left for Westmoreland, I received a letter from Dad. His handwriting on the envelope was shaky but recognizable. For a long moment, I considered returning it unopened. But curiosity won out, and I carefully tore open the seal. Inside was a short note, along with a small tarnished key. "Angelo," the letter began, "I know you may never forgive me, and I don't blame you. I made terrible choices and hurt the person I should have protected above all others. There are no excuses. This key opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Inside is your mother's jewelry. It's the one thing I couldn't bring myself to sell, even at my most desperate. It belongs to you not to pay for Jason's legal fees or my mistakes, but because your mother would have wanted you to have it. I'm staying at the homeless shelter on 5th Street. If you ever want to talk, that's where you can find me. But I understand if you don't. I am proud of you for standing your ground and fighting for your future. It took losing everything for me to see how wrong I was. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to at least hear my apology in person. With love, despite everything, Dad." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my journal. The key I secured in my wallet. I wasn't ready to forgive him. Perhaps I never would be. But I appreciated this small acknowledgement of his failings and his effort to save this one connection to my mother. As I packed the last of my belongings into my used car, ready to drive toward my long-delayed future, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness for what had been lost, anger that still occasionally flared, but predominantly a sense of hard-won independence and clarity. My father had taught me an unexpected lesson that sometimes the people we love the most can hurt us the deepest, and that true strength comes not from avoiding pain, but from choosing how to respond to it. I had chosen to prioritize my future rather than remain entangled in a cycle of enabling and disappointment, It wasn't the easy choice, but it was the right one. And as I pulled away from Ryan's house headed toward Westmoreland, and all it represented, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them on my own terms. My future, so nearly derailed, was firmly back in my own hands. 3 years passed like a whirlwind. I immersed myself in my studies at Westmoreland, maintaining a near-perfect GPA, while participating in research projects and volunteer work at the university hospital. The Resilience in Medicine program provided not just financial support, but also valuable mentorship and networking opportunities that positioned me well for medical school applications. Dr. Harris remained a constant presence in my academic journey, offering guidance when needed, and challenging me to push beyond my comfort zone. Under her supervision, I co-authored a research paper on innovative patient communication techniques in oncology that was published in a respected medical journal. It was a proud moment that validated all the sacrifices and hard work. My personal life flourished as well. I formed deep friendships with classmates who shared my passion for medicine, joined a running club that gave me a healthy outlet for stress, and even began dating Sophia, a brilliant biochemistry major with dreams of pharmaceutical to research. Life had a fullness and purpose that I sometimes feared had been permanently lost during those dark days after my father's betrayal. I had just been accepted to 3 top medical schools and was celebrating with friends when a letter arrived from an unfamiliar address. The handwriting, however, was immediately recognizable. Dad. I had not seen or spoken to him since that day in the courtroom 3 years earlier. The letter sat on my desk for 2 days before I finally found the courage to open it. Dear Angelo, it began. I hope this letter finds you well. I've been following your achievements from afar through the university newsletter. The publication of your research paper made me prouder than I can express. You're achieving everything you always dreamed of, and I'm grateful that my poor choices ultimately didn't prevent that. My life has taken many turns since we last spoke. After several months at the shelter, I found work as a maintenance man at an apartment complex. The pay is modest, but it comes with a small studio apartment. I've been sober for 2 years now. Yes, I had to admit to myself that alcohol had played a significant role in my poor judgment regarding Jason. Speaking of Jason, he was sentenced to 6 years, but will likely serve 4 with good behavior. I visit him monthly, though our relationship has changed dramatically. He's attending GED classes in prison and claims to be reflecting on his choices. Time will tell if that's genuine. I'm writing because I've recently been diagnosed with early-stage prostate cancer. The prognosis is good with treatment, but it's made me realize how much unresolved pain still exists between us. I'm not asking for forgiveness or financial help. I have decent insurance through my job. I'm simply letting you know and saying once again how deeply sorry I am for everything. If you ever want to reach out, my address and phone number are below. If not, I understand completely. Either way, I wish you nothing but success and happiness in your medical career and beyond. Love always, Dad. The letter hit me harder than I expected. Cancer, the disease that had taken my mother, now threatening my father. Despite everything, the news caused an ache in my chest that I couldn't ignore. I didn't call him. I wasn't ready for that. But I did send a check for $500 with a brief note for temporary housing costs during treatment. Not forgiveness, just basic humanity. It was all I could offer at that point. A small gesture of acknowledgement without emotional reconciliation. The money wasn't much to me now, with my scholarship covering most expenses and a part-time research position providing income. But it would help ensure he didn't lose his apartment while undergoing treatment. A month later, another letter arrived, thanking me for the assistance and updating me on his first round of radiation therapy. I read it, filed it away with the others, and continued with my life. Then, just as I was preparing to graduate and begin medical school, a final letter arrived. This one was different, written on official prison stationery. Angelo. It began in unfamiliar handwriting. You don't know me, but I'm Jason's cellmate writing this at his request. Jason was attacked 3 days ago in the yard. He didn't make it. Before he died, he asked me to tell Martin that he was sorry for everything. He also mentioned you, saying you were right about him all along, and he hopes you became a doctor despite what he did. The prison has notified your father, but Jason wanted to make sure you knew too. For what it's worth, he seemed genuinely regretful in his final moments. Respectfully, Thomas Wilson. I sat with the letter for a long time, processing the complex emotions it stirred. Jason's death wasn't cause for celebration despite the pain he had caused. It was simply a tragic end to a troubled life, one that had intersected with mine in the worst possible way. I found myself thinking about my father now dealing with both cancer and the death of someone he had sacrificed everything to protect. Whatever resentment I still carried, I couldn't imagine his pain in that moment. After much reflection, I did something I hadn't done in over 3 years. I called my father. The conversation was awkward, stilted at first. We carefully navigated around the deepest wounds, focusing instead on his health updates and my upcoming medical school plans. But as we talked, something shifted subtly. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first tentative step toward a new understanding. I heard about Jason, I said finally, when we could no longer avoid the subject. Yes, Dad replied, his voice thick with emotion. It's been difficult. I'm sorry, I offered and meant it. Not sorry for maintaining my boundaries, but sorry for the pain he was experiencing. The irony is, Dad continued after a moment, he called me the day before it happened. First time in months. Said he was getting released early for good behavior and needed money to start fresh. I told him no. For the first time ever, I refused him. I was genuinely surprised. That must have been hard for you. It was the right thing to do, Dad said simply. Too late, obviously, but I finally understood what you tried to tell me years ago. About enabling. About consequences. That conversation didn't magically heal our relationship, but it opened a door that I had thought permanently closed. We began speaking monthly, brief calls that gradually grew less uncomfortable. I didn't attend Jason's funeral, but I did send flowers with a card signed simply Angelo. As I packed for my move to medical school, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The path had been far more difficult and painful than I ever could have imagined, but I had emerged stronger, more resilient, and with a deeper understanding of both human frailty and strength. The lessons had been harsh but invaluable. That love without boundaries can become destructive. That helping someone doesn't always mean giving them what they ask for. That sometimes the bravest, most loving action is to say no. That your worth isn't determined by others' treatment of you, but by your own choices and integrity. Most importantly, I learned that rebuilding after betrayal is possible. Not by forgetting or minimizing the harm done, but by refusing to let it define your future. By choosing consciously and deliberately to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. Today, as I prepare to take the first steps toward becoming the doctor I always dreamed of being, I carry these lessons with me. They will make me a better physician, one who understands that true healing sometimes requires painful honesty and difficult choices. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my father. Perhaps we'll eventually find our way to something resembling forgiveness. Perhaps not. But I know that I've made peace with my decision to prioritize my own well-being and future, even when it meant walking away from someone I loved. Sometimes refusing to help is the only way to truly help. Sometimes the hardest choices are the most necessary ones. And sometimes when someone throws away your future for another person, the most powerful response is to reclaim that future for yourself, one determined step at a time. Have you ever had to make the painful choice between helping someone you love and protecting your own future? Did you choose to help or walk away? And do you regret your decision? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might be struggling with similar difficult choices. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply put yourself first. I wish you courage and clarity in all your difficult decisions.